Hey everybody, thank you for joining us today on the GatherUp vlog. My name is Garrett Sussman. I'm the head of content at Traject, and I am talking to none other than Mike Blumenthal. You all know Mike if you are a GatherUp customer or you've read any of his blog posts in the past. Mike has worked, across the industry forever. He knows local inside and out, always experimenting, always testing because Google is always changing. He did a really cool case study that he's going to walk us through today. And he is running GatherUp with Aaron Weike as part of by Traject. Really excited. Thank you so much for joining me today, Mike.
Thanks, Garrett. Thanks for having me. So I ran into this very small diner a couple of years ago that had just opened up, and it struck me that it offered a tremendous opportunity to learn what works and what doesn't in Google My Business. I was riding my bike down the road on a day into work, and I passed by a restaurant that had previously closed, not once, but twice, and it had just opened up with a new owner. And I have a soft spot for country diners. I love home cooking. I love the authenticity. I love the fact that when you go in, they call you hun. Meet Tam, the owner of Spot to Be restaurant. She had previously worked only as a waitress, as a first-time owner, and she decided to give it a go at this very small restaurant. It opened in May 2018, just south of the town where I grew up. The town is interesting because even though it's not very populous, it's at the center of a regional shopping area. So it has a large number of restaurants. So it's a relatively competitive market. Her restaurant has 9 seats and a counter, so not very big. And I was fascinated by this sort of yeoman's effort of opening a business, having never done it before. And as you can see from this graphic, she's located outside of the main restaurant district. So, location is everything, proximity is everything. And while she is on a busy north-south highway, she isn't near the main where the office space is and where the shopping center is. Doing marketing for a small business is always a challenge. As you can see from this sign, it's a particular challenge when you're really small. So I took this picture, I went in and asked her, why did she have her sign misspelled on her advertising? Well, she said, well, they made the mistake, the printing company, they sent her a new sign that was spelled correctly, but she found that with this sign up, drive-by people would stop in and tell her the sign was misspelled, and she figured it was a chance to get them to see her very cute interior. So, but there's much more wrong with this picture from a marketing point of view than her signage. When I met her in May 2018, she had a Facebook-only presence. She knew Facebook from her own personal experience and understood how to use it, had no clue how Google worked. She had no Google listing. She hadn't really had a phone up to this point, so Google didn't know about her. She had no website. She had zero budget, and she was away from the main restaurant district. And interestingly to me, because I've studied local so long and I'm interested in the theory about how Google assembles local listings, she was the 3rd restaurant at this location in 4 years, which creates incredible NAP confusion. NAP being name, address, and phone number. And in the dogma of local search, it is thought that NAP is the singular most important thing to have consistent down to the period on the street. When you did a search on the previous owners, obviously they're everywhere to be found, whether it was MapQuest or other sites. And it was truly a case study in multiple messed up listings at the same location. That being said, it was a great situation for a case study. There's a lot right with this situation. They had no existing digital footprint. She hadn't done any listings with a phone company. Google had no clue who she was. I figured that I could, since she was doing Facebook, I could do the Google side. It would be very inexpensive, very low time investment for me. Google had a number of tools that could benefit her. I would be able to test fairly cleanly which of those had the biggest influence on visibility. And because I wasn't being paid. I was doing this pro bono. I was able to implement it over a very long period of time, so I could take an action and then measure it over long periods. So even though I was doing a correlation study, I think I was able to sort of create cleaner correlations than normal and have a little more confidence in the data set. And the other benefit of me doing this was that I would occasionally hit her up for a good breakfast. She never gave it to me for free though.
What'd you get, Mike? What was your go-to?
Oh well, she does a great job with just traditional, bacon and eggs, but she has these really nice French toast as well. So I had a ton of questions in this situation. The first was, since she was active on Facebook, not in a paid way, but I was curious which would deliver more conversions, pre-sale conversions. At the time, in 2018, there was a lot of skepticism whether you could get a Google website to rank. So that was a question for me. And there's also ongoing, which things influence rank, which things influence relevance and reach. And so I was curious which of these services that Google provided would have the most impact on her visibility and rank. Would she be, I didn't want to pay for a citation campaign. And I figured that the NAP confusion would be a good situation in which to test whether or not the dogma around NAP being consistent as a necessity was true or not, or would it, as I note here, screw the pooch. And ultimately, whether a Google-only marketing strategy could work to provide ongoing lift and benefit for a small business like this. So I put in place some guidelines, sort of standards around which I operated. One only was going to initially focus on Facebook and Google. There would be no ad spend by her on Facebook and no ad spend by me on Google. I only wanted to use tactics that could be business initiated. In other words, they were in Google My Business and they weren't incredibly complicated. I didn't want to do things that involved JavaScripts or other fancier things. And I wanted to train her to be engaged in the process so that when we were done, she could do this herself. And my goal was to do this campaign in less than an hour a month, since I was doing it on a pro bono basis. The other goal was to not eat there too often, because I did have chicken fried steak once and it was a killer. I had indigestion for the next day.
It's really interesting though, because it shows to me, like to your point about the whole purpose of the guidelines, is that this is something that any business owner could do. Like, it's not too scary. It's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. If you're not already doing this, in theory, depending on the results, you would be able to do this yourself.
Right. And I think it also provides a framework for an agency that wants to provide a low-end service to businesses to do it as well. So we're going to address both those questions. So
Great.
Any study like this has certain limits. As you should know, correlation is not causation. This is essentially a correlative study. I can't prove that the movement and measurements of success that I'm going to show you were a result of my actions. But because I stretch it out over such a long time, and because there's so few other marketing signals intervening, I have reasonable confidence that the correlations were in fact reflective of causal factors. But it is one case study. It's one business in one town, in one competitive situation, one set of keywords. It's anecdotal, and that's not a large-scale study. I would encourage you, and I think you should think about doing this for yourself. If you're an agency, consider going out and finding a small business that can't afford marketing and doing this on their behalf. And then the final limit is that there's limited metrics to measure success. I was going to use two major metrics, but we only had access to Google Insights and Facebook analytics, both of which there's some criticism of in the marketplace, but at least directionally, I felt like they would give me some ideas, but they are limited. So my goals to measure success were twofold. One was to measure rank on a range of these terms that you can see. I had 6 breakfast terms, 6 lunch terms, plus geo-modified. So I think that was 24 terms that we were looking to see what kind of rank improvement we could get. And the other metric was to look at what I call low funnel key performance indicators, things that I could measure in Google Analytics or in Google Insights and in Facebook that indicated high intent on the part of the consumer. Driving directions, click to calls, and messages either through Google or Facebook. So these were one of the metrics of success. So the time frame I did this was from spring of 2018 through fall of 2019. And effectively, about each quarter, we worked on a different part of the project. Spring 2018, we got started. We worked on GMB. We taught her how to do posts, and we built a Google website. Building a Google website is a super simple thing. I mean, basically, you click the button, Google builds it. You double check your photos, make sure you have the right call to action. It literally takes minutes to build. So like Google websites, their strengths, their weaknesses. One strength is it's super quick, super easy to build. It's easy to maintain and update because anytime you update the Google My Business with your hours or your menu, it automatically updates the website. If you do Google Posts, it automatically adds those to it. It'll automatically bring in a few reviews for you. So it's very easy to maintain it, so very little maintenance involved. It's mobile ready, it's very, very fast. Good calls to action, HTTPS by default. So it has mobile and HTTPS, so in that sense, it's a solid product. And in tests of websites, it's faster than most. On the flip side, from an SEO point of view, it has some disadvantages. One is it's a single page website, which really means that you can't explicate in great detail the things you do or the products you deliver. Initially, it struck me that I had no control over title tags. I learned later that wasn't true. It had no control over metadata, so you could sort of massage how it appeared in search. The biggest issue from an SEO point of view, besides the length and the size of the site, is there's no internal linking. Linking is one of the most controllable things. Internal linking on your website is one of the most controllable SEO signals you can send to Google, and it doesn't offer any of it. And it has lame analytics, and not just lame analytics, there's no ability to add JavaScripts to enhance the site, so you can't add any plugins. It's not just analytics. As an aside, Google introduced these websites in 2017. I've tracked their growth over time, and Google has, on a worldwide basis, been very successful with these sites. Several millions in the United States, but worldwide, even India and Brazil, Malaysia, they've been very successful with the product. So spring of 2018, May, early June, we created the listing. We had a card sent to her. She called me with the code on it. We verified, created the website, showed how to do Google Post. She gave me access to her Facebook page. We uploaded a few photos. I had maybe 2 hours in sort of getting this project kicked off on its way. She continued to do Facebook posts. So the following summer, she was doing Facebook and Google Posts. She didn't do that many Google Posts. She did about 13 during this period. She obviously was very active in Facebook. She had a good following from her many relationships in the city. But as you can see over time, few less. So we were shocked and surprised to see website rankings starting to show up mid-July. We got our first sort of visible organic rank. And by the end of the summer, we had, I think, 6 pages ranking, and we had visibility in organic, which demonstrated clearly that Google websites could rank, that whatever issues were holding them back were same as any website being held back. Lack of content, lack of information, lack of links, that sort of stuff. And we also started to see, this is another report from Whitespark, started to see some appearance in the local pack. So when we looked at the KPIs for this period, we we compared Google's click-to-call, drive directions, and messaging. We saw 49 actions from Google, and notice that they're increasing as we go through the summer. And with Facebook, we saw decreasing actions. Almost 3 times as many KPI low funnel indicators from Google as from Facebook. Facebook is a great way for her to stay in touch with the people she knows. It's not as great a way of finding new customers if you're not advertising. I think it's a great environment for many things, but in terms of lead generation for new clients, clearly here it's not doing as well as Google. Another aside on posts, that this content that is in posts, while it doesn't directly allow you to improve your rank, it does improve Google's understanding of your business. And if you have posts that relate to the searches that people are doing, Google will then show this content in the search results as snippets, indicating that Google has sort of justified your content in the result of this display.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and in high intent queries, you see this. If you do, for example, engagement rings, Williamsville, you will see posts show up in the local finder very high in the business profiles. So they're doing this even more now than they were when we first got started. So during this period, we did Google posts, Facebook posts, uploaded a few photos. I didn't spend much time at all. You can see less than an hour total during the summer. She worked on Facebook posts. She did her few Google posts. So we moved into fall. You know, we had 2 experiments in the fall. The first one was a miserable failure, and the second wasn't. I was very excited when we decided to do her menus. I thought all of this rich content, all of the semantic items and entities that she could be searched for, you know, burgers and cheeseburgers and corned beef hash. So she sent me her menu, and in typical small business fashion, she didn't send it to me in a nice, neat ASCII file. She sent it to me in some bizarre Microsoft Publisher format that I tried every which way from Sunday to extract the ASCII from this so I wouldn't have to retype it. I ended up blowing a Saturday morning retyping her menu into Google. Just a lesson that when you be careful what you ask for when you're working with small businesses. Anyways, entered it, super excited, got it in 1st of October, sat, watched, waited. And not only did nothing really happen in our rank, we saw no additional keywords rank. We saw our lower ranking keywords ranking lower. So it was a huge disappointment for me after, you know, putting in a good bit of time. But I didn't want to give up. At that point, I was kind of discouraged. I didn't want to give up on the experiment. So Saturday morning, early in December, I was playing with the website, and I noticed this message in there. Describe your business in 1 line. For best results, include Olean. And I thought, whoa, this seems to me like a real clue. And I checked it out, and turned out that what Google was doing was taking the headline from the website and the lead description from the website, combining them to create the title tag. So I took that opportunity. I spent the morning futzing with various options and created this title tag, which you will note is longer than 60 characters. What was amazing to me in this effort was literally by the end of the day, we started seeing ranking increases. So by the next ranking report, we were seeing ranking increases just from the title tag change. So what happened to our metrics during this period? Beyond rank, click to calls, we saw 0 from Facebook, and we saw 82 from Google during this period. And you can see they start to go up later after we fix the title tags. So in terms of this first question of whether Google or Facebook delivers likely customers pre-sale, I think the answer is in. Even though she was incredibly active on Facebook, even though she had a good following and a lot of likes and a lot of reshares, Google, with the minimal efforts we put in, had generated significantly more interest in terms of driving directions, and calls, which for her were the key performance indicators. Now, on the side on title tags, you notice that my title tag was long. I've always been a believer in title tags being a little longer. I never had a chance to test it, though. The dogma in the industry is that you have to have a short title tag. First, if you note on the right, the mobile title tag is much longer than 60 characters. Common wisdom says it's 60, but it's actually 160 characters on mobile, so it's much longer. So Joel Headley did an interesting experiment. He created a title tag and then added a nonsense word, which originally on the left you see wasn't showing in search when you searched at it. He added it to the title tag at very far out in the title tag at the end to see if Google would index it based on this. And sure enough, this nonsense word, which would result in no other search results, Google found it and delivered search results based on this title tag at the far end of the title tag out, like he said, 250 characters. He then took this experiment one step further. He works for Patient Pop. They have access, they build and automate marketing and websites for physicians' practices. So he did an experiment with 250 sites with long title tags. He added neighborhoods, all the surrounding neighborhoods to the business name, the who, what, and the where. He added extensive neighborhood information to the end of the title tags, creating on 250 sites average title tags about 144 characters long. And what he found was that they saw 16% more ranking keywords and a 2-position keyword improvement on the keywords they were tracking. So at least in local, the need for abbreviated title tags, particularly given that Google is rewriting them so much, is much less than it's ever been. And I think you can feel free to be explicative in your title tag to tell people not just who and what you do, but where you do it. And it can be in a little bit more detail than you may have thought. So anyways, during this period, we, obviously we're continuing to do Google posts and Facebook posts. We did the Google menu. 2 hours of my Saturday spent on a publisher document. And then we updated the title tags. It took me an hour, but now that I know that it's there, it would take me 15 minutes. I was experimenting because I didn't fully understand how they did it initially. So I did have 3 hours in during this period, but most of it was shoot myself in my foot 3 hours. So moving into the next phase, we decided to work on reviews. She had no review plan in place. So we decided to put in GatherUp's TextBack product. TextBack allows the end user to initiate the review process. So I printed up some signs, I put them on her tables and table tents. She then would mention to consumers as they came through to please give her feedback, to text the word review to her feedback number, and then it would start the review process. And in the period just prior to this, she got 4 Google reviews and 1 Facebook recommendation. In the period, the winter period where we initiated it, she got 27 Google reviews, and so 7 times as many Google reviews, and then but 9 times as many total, because she got 5 Facebook recommendations and 11 first-party reviews. So it was a very successful strategy matching up TextBack with her business, because in the restaurants business, it's very difficult for many of these small restaurants to gather email address.
And I can imagine too, especially now, we'll talk a little bit more later, but with QR codes, those have become back in vogue recently. So if you're any sort of, in, brick and mortar business, people are more aware of QR codes and learning how they work. They're more likely, in addition to the text back features.
Yeah, so in our example, we put in a very small QR code. I unfortunately did not track the code. I should have put a UTM code on the QR code to see if people were using that or not. But you're right, QR codes are having a resurgence and people are becoming much more familiar with them. And in terms of hands-free at a restaurant, for example, my daughter was telling me the other day that they weren't given a menu. There was a QR code on the table. They pointed their phone at it, and the menu then was a web page on her mobile.
Cool.
So what did we see in terms of ranking improvements with reviews? Obviously, there's some confusion between the reviews and the other stuff we're still doing, title tags, where we were seeing an increase. But we saw a steady increase from the date of implementation through February. We saw a slight increase, but then we regained all those. And towards the end, we also saw an improvement in the lower ranking terms moving up. So not only did we see a general improvement in the top positions, but we saw the lower keywords moving up the ranks. So it was successful. Just a note about reviews, an aside. I did a blog post at GatherUp about a Google patent written in 2018, how Google looks at reviews as much about understanding the entity as they do about ranking the entity. They noted that they track the frequency of descriptive text. In other words, things like categories, entity names, nouns, adjectives, they count them. They determine a score for every word, and this score then becomes associated with a particular entity. If it's a positive score, it gets strongly associated. If it's a negative score, it's weakly associated. So Google is able to ascertain a lot of granular detail about a business from the reviews. So while reviews do have an influence in rank, they have a much greater influence in Google understanding your business and what things Google will show your business for, thus increasing relevance on a broader range of terms. And then as a side benefit of them having text back, they also got GatherUp's social sharing feature. A lot of small businesses have trouble generating content. We've produced a super easy way to make very attractive visual content out of the reviews and get them quickly posted to Facebook and to Google with very minimal effort. So a nice side benefit for her and for any business. So during this period, we did Google posts, Facebook posts. We set up text back, which took me about 2 hours, including the design and the tabletop stands. She asked for reviews on an ongoing basis through that successfully. So move into the spring of 2019. I did this, I set up the GatherUp text back in January as we were beta testing it. And I harangued her to get an interview with her. And you think I could get an interview with her during that period? I couldn't. But finally, she called me back early June. I got an article written, and you can see June 10th. And in the article, we were able to link to her site, and I wrote a companion piece on my site. So we were able to get 2 links to her Google My Business website. First 2 links, you can see they showed up in Ahrefs very quickly on the 19th after we got them. And what was amazing to me was I was sitting there, that morning, and in comes the ranking report, and just, my eyes popped open. It was just such a pleasure to see her moving up so quickly. We'd been doing well, but this was obviously a huge win for her.
Wow.
You can see this is when we implemented the links, and again, we got a greater reach, more keywords, did better in positions 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, also did better in the lower positions. So it was a real solid win, only 2 links. So spring 2019, we got those links successfully. So which brings us to summer and decision by me to deal with the NAP confusion. I thought I had made my point up to this point, up to here, that you could do a lot without worrying about this. But the question I had was, would I see a bump if I did extensive cleanup? So we did the whole thing. We went through, found every wrong location listing for the previous restaurants, either nuke them or change them. We also did an extensive citation campaign across a range of sites, some important, many not. I should have done them separately so I could have distinguished between the two things. We did start seeing a few of the links from the citation campaign show up in our link tracker. But we saw virtually no change in rank or exposure from this effort. It really raises the question about NAP and citations and what role they play. This is a segment I took out of an article I wrote in 2006 when I was describing the first research into citations. And I noticed that you didn't need necessarily a link. This is when Google was surfacing these in the business profile. All you needed was a street address and a business mention that Google could match up with your business. And I noted at the time that it saw a lot of pages as relevant to this, but at some point they would normalize the results and drop the less significant page. So that's story one, which is around citations. You have to understand that Google, as it has eaten the long tail of local search, has made many of these secondary directories totally irrelevant on pages that have no prominence and no ability to influence your site. So those have dropped way off in importance. On the NAP front, Google switched from what they did in 2006 to 2012, which every 6 weeks they would reassemble their web scrape to create a local listing, which was very unreliable. And because you wouldn't ever know which particular set of citations they would use to create the listing. So any inconsistency that you would find on the internet could, for example, cause you to have the wrong information on your listing at Google, or could worse, cause you to pick up the URL from a competitor or the phone number from a competitor. It was a mess. It was why they put in place the knowledge graph. Local was the first entity in the knowledge graph implemented in 2012. In the knowledge graph, essentially there is a fixed record for your business that Google views as canonical. They're no longer reconstructing it every 6 weeks. They now add information to it. So if you can find a directory that allows you to add information that Google might not have, Google will accrete that. But they don't need it to maintain record consistency. So this issue of NAP consistency, I think, it's a remnant. It's an anachronism. It's a remnant of an older time. So here's what we did. I did actually, if you did a citation cleanup like this with Whitespark, it would have, to the extent which I did it, would have cost you $299. I didn't actually pay. Whitespark did this as a courtesy. But you can see the impact it had. So where does that leave us? When I go back and address these questions, does Google or an active Facebook deliver more pre-sale conversions? Duh.
The obvious. Yep.
Obvious. Can Google My Business website rank? Absolutely. And it's only limited by the same things that limit any website, which is good title tags, good H1 headers, good content, and links. What impact would Google only tools have on rank? Well, we saw that posts, website, and reviews all impacted visibility. Menus had 0. Could she rank without a citation campaign? Absolutely. Would NAP confusion screw the pooch? Absolutely not. And could a Google-only marketing strategy provide ongoing lift and benefit? We think it's clear that it can, at least in the current environment. So just a few quick takeaways before we get into the next section. One is that citations aren't what they used to be. You really need to test what you're doing with them. You need to not pay for a subscription with somebody like Yext. If you are, cut that expense immediately. It may be worth claiming the top 6, 8, or 10, but it isn't worth paying for that on an ongoing basis. Steady Google posts can impact your reach. It does influence Google search results. Not every GMB service leads to rank or reach increase. And that makes sense why it wouldn't. And reviews work. They really are a successful way of increasing both your visibility at Google and helping new customers find you. And links, and I would add mentions in news media, equally powerful. We have seen situations where businesses have been mentioned in major news media and caused incredible, as much or more benefit than a link. So they're very, very powerful. When I take all of these and look at it over the course of this and map the efforts to the rank, there's a really tight correlation that you see going on between each of these efforts. So it increases my confidence that these efforts are the ones that were causal in this situation. When we look at the overall Google versus Facebook KPIs for the whole duration of the campaign, we saw 9x time from Google as we did from Facebook, with much less effort, fewer posts, fewer ongoing, much less ongoing work. We then, just for interest's sake, we took the Google KPIs and we broke them down to see where they were coming from. And for her, driving direction is a much better indicator of customer intent than a phone call. She does, for example, doesn't take reservations. And it's a small town, so once you drive there once, you know where it is. So driving directions are a really good metric for her of new incomings. And as you can see, those were the bulk of her KPIs. The other interesting correlation we did was I mapped the cumulative reviews to her KPIs. And once we started, you can see I don't know, this jump in KPIs in December.
Right.
She had a new employee and she kept getting calls, I think is what that is. And I didn't take it out. So you should level that part of the graph off. But you can see that once she got into reviews, there was a very close correlation between an increasing KPIs and increasing number of reviews. When I interviewed her, she noted that her sales had doubled in a year. When I sat down and did sort of a back of the napkin calculation, I calculated that somewhere in the order of 15% of her revenue was a result of Google. As I went in one day though, and she told me this story about how a customer who couldn't speak English, which is a very rare event in the rural area where I live, came in and pulled out Google Maps and pointed to a food item and said that's what he wanted. And at that moment, I thought, God, I've been so focused on the local pack and so focused on search. What role did Google Map play in this? So I immediately went into her Google Insights, which admittedly, there are some questions about the reliability of Google Maps Insight. But right along, it had been equal to search. And later in our experiment, significantly greater contributor. So I then plotted these efforts against Google Maps rankings and found a very similar correlative relationship, which was interesting to me. I brought this up to David Mim. We wrote about it in Street Fight fall of last year, that Google Maps is a largely underappreciated discovery channel. Historically, it's been used for recovery. You're going someplace, you want to know where it is. But Google has been making more and more efforts to turn it into a almost Instagram-like discovery environment. And it's my contention that being Google's interface to the real world and being so tied with mobile, it's for now Google's third leg in search behind Google search and YouTube, but it could at some point become their prominent search interface. So David at the time was at ThriveHive and did some interesting research comparing the volume of searches on maps in the light blue versus regular searches in the dark blue across industry category. On the left, as you're looking at this on the left, hotels, recreation, tourism, restaurants are on the left. So those that are more spontaneous, you see many more map queries. On the far right, you see things like legal services, where you see fewer map queries. But even in legal services, it's a significant percentage, although nowhere near as great as you see on the left side. So I think in many categories, Google Maps is becoming of increasing importance and should be considered in your search strategies. So if you were going to develop this as an agency, as a business model, what would it look like? What are the things you have to do? Step one is deep six expensive citation subscriptions. They're too costly for most small businesses. A monthly fee is unwarranted. There may be a place for some lower level citation services, but I would leave it to last, like I did in this experiment, to see if it's absolutely necessary. I mean, certainly businesses need to be found on Uber and Lyft and Apple. So you need to verify those, and those may be absolutely critical. And I think you want to be sure they're found on Facebook and Yelp and Foursquare and even Bing. But I do believe there's a market for agencies to offer a Google-only entry-level service as a sort of a lead-in to a higher value package. I think there are enough KPIs that you can literally prove its worth, not necessarily with ranking reports, but with Google's reports on calls and driving directions. I think those are, we know that Google underreports calls, but they still are a relatively useful metric to demonstrate that you're delivering customers to that business's door and to move these businesses necessarily, hopefully, away from ranking reports. I think there's value in implementing reviews as a service in this context. Obviously, it creates both information for the business so they can improve, but it also, more importantly, increases the reach of the business on new search terms and increases the rank. And it certainly, you as an agency, if you're going to do this though, I think you want to develop value beyond just the asking. In the case of Spot to Be, the value was finding a unique way for her to ask for the review that didn't disrupt her flow of work, didn't require an email address. There are many other ways to do that. And then thinking in terms of a few targeted links. But this is a package that you can put together and that you can use as an upsell to a greater breadth and depth of services once you've proved its worth. And it's one that you can do, as I've demonstrated, in an hour a month.
I really like all of that, Mike. It makes a lot of sense for an agency to offer that and can be tailored to different industries as well. Like you were pointing out how important the intent of driving directions were for TAM, whereas if you're working with a doctor's office or a lawyer, calls are going to be a significantly more valuable KPI that you can track. And then, you know, if you're going to do any sort of call tracking there, it's still like a low lift, high value sort of ad for that business.
Exactly. The other concern that's expressed in search is whether Google is sort of consuming all of search with their what is called immersive search, whether Google is stealing your traffic in some ways. I did some interesting case studies on sources of key performance indicators in a different market. This is a bricks and mortar. And what we found was that, at least in local, Google was delivering 94% of all KPIs, calls, driving directions, form fills, messages. When we did this research in 2015, we looked at the Google segment and we broke it out into which ones were web related, in other words, which leads came to the website and which came directly from Google, from the business profile. And in this business in 2015, 70% were coming from the business profile and 25% from the website, the bulk of those from Google. But when we recalculated that in 2019,
Wow.
we saw this even shift more heavily towards Google My Business delivering the leads. This doesn't mean by any stretch that the website isn't important. It's incredibly important. It's how Google knows who you are, what you do, and where you do it. It's the only really solid way you have of influencing Google's rankings. So it doesn't, even so, it doesn't mean the website is important. It just means that you need to understand that Google is making every effort to keep people from going to your website and make the call from there. Google is becoming ever more immersive. They've created visuals, particularly in mobile, that look very much like a mobile website, where all of the information you need is readily available to the searcher. Whatever they need, directions, calls, quick descriptions of what offered, pictures. They also are becoming ever more transactional and ever more visual. More and more calls to action in the knowledge panel, in the business profile, reserve a table, order ahead, delivery, and more visual, where it is becoming visuals, particularly in the restaurant, are ever present. This trend isn't going to end. Google is going to continue to work to create the experience that's the quickest, fastest, the best for the customer and the best for them. That trend is not going to shift. But if they're still delivering customers to you and they're largely free, then the question of, is Google stealing your traffic, from my point, is a moot question. The answer to that is that you should always have a diversity of marketing sources at your ready. I think email is a hugely viable alternative to Google. But if you see winter coming, there's a saying in Norway that there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothes. And that's particularly true in Google. You can see this trend of them removing traffic from your website. Don't throw away your website. That's a critical piece of clothing. Just buff up your Google My Business with good pictures, good reviews, so that you get more of those calls. As a final note, this happened all pre-COVID. COVID hit her very hard. She's still in business. She survived. She thrived. She cut back to herself. She was literally cooking and serving outside for a while. But it's an existential moment, not just for her, but for every business. This work that I did took me less than an hour a week. If you're an agency listening in, I think you have a tremendous opportunity here to do something like this for some small businesses in your area. One, you'll learn a lot. Two, you get some great data. Three, you'll make some great friends. Four, you might get some great food. And you can help these businesses move through this existential moment. And in that, hopefully find some of them who can become long-term trusted customers and friends. When I was building this, I was listening to NPR, and there was a jazz musician on who made his living by performing. And he said, which and it struck me very deeply, that all bad things that happen have the potential to be tragic, but they can also have the potential to be tragic and transformative. And I think one of the beauties of marketing is that we can define our jobs to help businesses navigate this transformation now more than ever. And I think that this might give you a path to do just that.
That's powerful, because it's true. I feel like right now, small businesses, people who start businesses get into it for a reason. They're so passionate and they just want to be successful. And especially if you care about your community, it's really important that these small businesses continue on in the context of what's going on. So if you as an agency can help, or even as a friend, I mean, if you have pro bono opportunities, now's the time to just reach out and do a little. Like, as you've shown, it doesn't take a lot, but yeah, it's really important right now to be visible on Google, be visible.
If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me, Mike@GatherUp.com. You can follow me at mblumenthal at Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn, Mike Blumenthal. I answer every email I get. Feel free. Don't hesitate to ask if you have a question. I'll be glad to help.
Mike, thank you so much. This is amazing. One or two questions before we leave. I think if you were to do this whole experiment again, you learned about Google Maps and you were able to look at the data and show that. But if you were going to start from scratch all over, what is maybe the most interesting thing that you would like to try to zero in on and find if it has an impact in study number 2?
Well, study number 2 for me would be if I could build her a small website with 6 or 8 pages where I carefully crafted title tags, H1 headers, and internal links. I think that would, if I could do that in this situation, I think that would have tremendous impact on her. And that would be the next thing to test, would be that. Certainly easy enough to do. I just haven't felt like doing it.
I think that would be really interesting, because to your point, it's like, even though you can do all of this without a website, it would be interesting to see the value of all that.
Well, even here though, we're not doing it without a website. We're just doing it with a single page website. I think one way to approach this is any business that's doing Facebook only. There was a period, 2012, 2013, where maybe that worked. It doesn't work anymore. There's still businesses though that believe they can get by with a Facebook only presence. And I believe that a place to start this project would be to find some of those businesses and perhaps convince them to try this as a lead in to possibly selling them a website. I think it's a great sort of stepwise project to get them in there.
Yeah, I think so. To your point about the agency, is like, it's the setup, especially if, while you want to be able to show the KPIs of the calls and the driving directions, if you're actually, like Tam mentioned anecdotally, she doubles her sales, that's absolutely a reason to continue to invest in digital marketing in some capacity.
And customers are coming in, showing her the phone and pointing to pictures on the phone, which speaks to the importance of her photographs. She does a great job shooting her food.
Last question, just in terms of the other tools that Google provides that weren't necessarily addressed in this study, are there any others that you think businesses should be using along the lines of like Q&A, for instance, or products that are starting to be added? What are your thoughts on other Google My Business tools?
My attitude is that every surface Google gives you, you should fill. If it's free, and then assess the paid surfaces. But I'm a big believer in Q&A. I wrote a guide to Q&A. It's on the GatherUp website. I believe products, if you're in the product business, they have very high visibility. I think it's a great tool, particularly now if you have Shopify or one of the POSs that interfaces with Google Merchant Center. They will show your products for free. I think that's a great opportunity, and a great, I think, in that. And now if you search for a specific product and you add nearby me, Google is now surfacing all local stores with those products in stock. That's free service. To me, that would be incredibly valuable if you've got a POS that'll interface with Google. So to me, Q&A products are all very valuable. Every space they give you, attributes are really valuable now, because they have a number of health attributes, so you can indicate how you're handling masking. They also have a number of attributes about appointments, which are incredibly important. I think posts are even more important than they've been, because consumers are very concerned. We see this in reviews corpus, and I experience it personally. If I go into a business and they're not masking carefully, I won't go back. That's the end of the story. I have asthma, I am no longer 39, and I just can't take the risk. I think a lot of consumers are like that, and I think Google Posts is a great way to communicate your COVID health and hygiene standards.
Absolutely. I think that's very relevant to what's going on right now. Speaking of which, if you have a chance, check out the GatherUp blog. Mike's written some really excellent pieces about review attributes, some of the COVID tags and attributes, as well as how you can actually use GatherUp to identify your own processes in within your business, and how your reviews can inform those business decisions on maybe implementing a good policy when it comes to masking up in your area. Mike, thank you so much again for joining me. This is all amazing stuff. I can't wait for your next case study. These are always the best experiments that you do. This is Mike Blumenthal of GatherUp. My name is Garrett Sussman. I'm from Traject. Thank you for joining us on GatherUp, and don't be a stranger. Reach out to Mike online.
Thanks again.